Yes, video library of World War II will focus on Italy, some of its history in the period between the two great wars, its leadership, and some of the campaigns which are written large and bold in the annals of World War II. Sicily, Anzio, Cassino. In recalling that period, we'll profile the man most responsible for shaping the destiny of Italy for a quarter of a century, the man called Il Duce, Benito Mussolini. Will take part in one of the biggest assault landings of the war as the Allies stride out from Africa and begin the long and tough Italian campaign on the beaches of Sicily. We'll be there as the Allies carve a tiny but bloody niche in the Italian peninsula with a beachhead at a place called Anzio. And we'll witness some of the toughest fighting of the entire campaign, a textbook classic of mountain warfare at one of the most tortuous locations in all of Europe, Monte Cassino. We begin with a look at the life and times of Benito Mussolini, the man who brought fascism to Italy. Our story begins in the days following the First World War.
It is the end of World War I. To Italy, victory has brought depression and disorder. Yesterday's heroes are jobless and hungry. There are strikes, communists who preach revolution. There is a liberal government that temporizes. This is destiny's hour for a glib blacksmith's son, who in turn has been pacifist, school teacher, journalist, and rising socialist. With war, he turned super patriot. With peace, he promises order, pride, territory. His price is power. His panacea is fascism. His name is Benito Mussolini. To him and to fascism flock a million men, angry men, alarmed industrialists, disillusioned veterans. Armed fascism takes the offensive, breaks strikes. Mussolini delivers an ultimatum: hand over Italy or we seize it. October 28, 1922, while Mussolini cautiously remains behind, bolder fascists march on Rome. 2 days later, Mussolini arrives to become premier, called by King Victor Emmanuel, who prefers fascism to civil war. Within a month, Mussolini turns dictator. Soon the little king comes to hate Mussolini, his bad manners, bombast, broken promises, but grudgingly he does the Duce's bidding. Mussolini plays the selfless leader, pushing public works, creating jobs, turning the Pontine marshes into green farms. Hungry Italy needs leadership. This is the honeymoon. Italy rebuilds, grows healthy, but public adulation is corrupting her leader, converting Mussolini's cynicism into self-confidence, then egomania. To him, Italy has become his own. The man who plays with lions is balding, far-sighted, harassed by war wounds, agonized by ulcers, and orders this cub to a zoo when she scratches him. But fascist Italy must be tough, athletic, virile. He plays his role with an actor's dedication. Italy believes the propagandist myth. So does Mussolini. His family life makes good propaganda. His wife, Rossella, is a simple hometown girl, bears him 3 sons and 2 daughters. Mussolini is an unfaithful husband, but fond parent. Socialist Giacomo Matteotti, who speaks out for freedom. Italians are outraged, and Mussolini wavers, indecisive, fearing overthrow. But the anti-fascists fail to act. The beatings and burnings continue. The power solidifies. And through all of this, that essential of totalitarian rule, propaganda, unending propaganda. Through every medium, forever shrilling the power of great leader and superstate. February 1929. Mussolini, the anti-cleric, the half-believer, formally recognizes the Vatican as a temporal state. But this can be only a truce, for fascism says man belongs to the state, not to his God. The superficial face of fascism impresses many Americans. Now the trains run on time. Italy has discipline, direction. Privately, Mussolini calls the United States a mongrel nation. Publicly,
I salute the great American people. I greet the wonderful energy of the American people. And I see and recognize among you sons of your land as well as ours, my fellow citizens, who are working to make America great.
mass idolatry turns Mussolini, politician, into Mussolini reincarnated Caesar. He dreams of conquering a new Roman Empire. For this, Italy needs soldiers. Sit with lira. Be patriotic. In 1934, an image from fascism and idolizes Mussolini. They meet at Stra, near Venice. The Duce treats his shabby admirer with easy superiority. Tolerantly, he listens to Hitler's plea for closer ties. Then, less tolerantly, as Hitler rants of Nordic superiority. Certain he can dominate him, the Duce later calls this strange German a madman. Humiliated, Hitler plans revenge against Mussolini's good friend, Chancellor Dollfuss of Austria. On July 25th, 1934, the Dollfuss children romp with the Duce's children at Mussolini's estate. At this moment, in Vienna, Austrian Nazis shoot Dollfuss and let him bleed to death. Dollfuss is buried, and Mussolini, furious at Hitler, orders his troops to the border to intervene for Austrian freedom. The Duce frightens the Fuhrer. Unready for war, Hitler disowns his agents. The putsch fails, and Mussolini gets the credit. Europe hails the Duce as the savior of the peace. At Streza, France and Britain join him in an anti-German front. And now Mussolini offends the world. On October 2nd, 1935, he orders his people to war against Ethiopia. The enemy is half-clad, ill-armed, ruled by Emperor Haile Selassie. A backward but proudly independent African people, their fathers had overwhelmed Italian aggressors in 1896. Mussolini promises Italy vengeance and empire. And so 170,000 Italians go to war, as Italians will do until fascism is consumed by the wars it glorifies. It is a small, safe war, the kind Mussolini likes. Even Bruno Mussolini volunteers. At the League of Nations, Italian diplomats boo Haile Selassie.
His Majesty, the Negus Haile Selassie. I call upon the first delegate of Ethiopia.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le... ምክንያቱም ወታደሮቹ ቦምቡ በወደቀ ጊዜ ጋዙን ነፋስ እስኪወስደው ድረስ መበታተኑን ስላወቁበት ነው።
Mussolini turns his little war into an exercise in national discipline and sacrifice. Women obediently trade gold wedding bands for steel. Wedding rings buy bombs. Unopposed Italian air power ranges over defenseless villages. Pilot Vittorio Mussolini tells how his bombs bloomed like a deadly rose on Ethiopian columns and says, war is the quintessence of beauty. By May of 1936, Mussolini has won Ethiopia and doomed the League of Nations.
Cui Roma Aveva Cesare, Virgilio ed Augusto.
Two months later, Franco's conservatives revolt against Spain's Republican government. Mussolini, approving politically, intervenes with men, arms, money. But war in Spain drags on until Italians grumble against their duce. In 1937, Hitler invites Mussolini to Germany. What the duce sees is beyond his wildest dreams. Overwhelming, brutal power organized to inflexible conquest of men's minds and freedom. The Rome-Berlin axis is formed, but now the coin has turned. Hitler, with his display of iron, is master. Mussolini, the camp follower. March 1938. Certain of Mussolini's subservience, Hitler strikes, incorporating Austria into his Reich. Envious, the duce imports the one thing he can have from Hitler, the goose step. In 1938, Rome gives Hitler a spectacular welcome. The new goose step is the icing on the cake. Mussolini agrees to German military assistance and, to the disgust of racially tolerant Italy, introduces anti-Semitism. Behind the scenes, all is not so tranquil. Mussolini claims the little king is upstaging him, and Hitler finds his welcome lacking in warmth. Publicly, all is unity. On parting, Mussolini says, "Henceforth, no force can separate us."
In September 1938, Czechoslovakia, whose German minority clamored for annexation, awaited Hitler's attack. The Czechs were ready to fight, confident of British and French support. But the democratic leaders, fearful of general war, chose appeasement instead. They asked Mussolini to intervene with Hitler. The result, the Munich Conference of Hitler, Mussolini, Neville Chamberlain, and French Premier Daladier. The result for unrepresented Czechoslovakia, partition and defeat.
Drained by Spain, wanting peace desperately, Italy gives the architect of Munich a hero's welcome. Now he can do no wrong. Even his private life is overlooked. Italians only wink at his many women, the last being Clara Petacci, green-eyed, shapely, 29 years his junior. Some grumble over her influence, but she remains his last enduring passion. Hitler strikes again, seizing what Munich left of Czechoslovakia. Mussolini feels compelled to attack someone. Carefully, he chooses his victim, Albania. There's another safe little war against 1 million Balkan peasants. Victory is swift. Conquered Albania joins the new Roman Empire. September 1939, Hitler blitzes Poland and World War II begins. Italians want peace, and in the hour of decision, Mussolini wavers. His advisors warn Italy is unequipped for major war. Mussolini proclaims Italy a non-belligerent, a neutral favoring Germany. Victory follows German victory, and when the Führer and Duce next meet at Brenner in March 1940, Mussolini listens like an admiring schoolboy. Mussolini gives Hitler his commitment. Italy will go to war at the first opportune moment. June 10th, 1940. Italians assemble to hear their destiny. Mussolini's announcement, war against Britain, the dagger into France. For the first time in 18 years, the Duce seriously misjudges his people. The crowd is stunned. They are sick of war. They dislike the Germans. They fear disaster. The Duce orders the usual preparations for victory. He informs Hitler, "We are on the march." The march, October 1940. He attacks Greece, but his half-hearted, ill-equipped troops are repulsed by the tough Greek army. Finally, Hitler has to send the Wehrmacht to rescue him. At the next meeting with the Fuhrer, Berchtesgaden, January 1941, Mussolini, after Greece, is little more than Hitler's lackey for Italy. Crisis follows crisis now. He is in a big war, not in Ethiopia or Albania. The new ordeal is North Africa. Again, the Germans have had to come to his rescue, but this time they too are reeling back as the British attack in savage counteroffensive. There is still adulation, but now he walks with the air of a poseur. Now people ask questions, have the audacity to complain. There are still fanatics who hero worship him. They only distort the true picture. Military disaster becomes collapse. In November 1942, American ground forces join the battle in Africa. The beaten Axis army surrenders. Ahead lies invasion of Italy, his Italy. At home, hungry, despairing Italians see Sicily overrun in 38 days. For Italy, the fascist dream has become a nightmare.
We will continue our profile of Benito Mussolini, but first to look at three specific combat campaigns: Sicily, Anzio, Cassino, which were military milestones of the war in Italy. The return of the Allies to the European continent in World War II took place on Italian soil with the invasion of Sicily.
May 13th, 1943. Tunis has fallen. The Africa Corps is destroyed. To British names, Montgomery, Alexander, America can now add her list of victorious leaders: Bradley, Patton, Eisenhower, and Airmen Spots and Doolittle. The Allies control the air from African airfields, but the enemy can still strike fitful blows from Italian airfields, even though we strike them day and night. Three things must now be done: make the Mediterranean safe, knock Italy from the war, ease pressure on the Russians by engaging German divisions. An invasion of Sicily offers the opportunity to achieve all three aims at once. First, however, the tiny island of Pantelleria in the narrow sea alley between Tunisia and Sicily must be won. 12 million pounds of bombs will fall, and on June 11th, when British infantry land, the Italian defenders give up. The first surrender ever induced solely by air bombardment. We have a fighter base to cover the beaches of Sicily. The generals debate the plan. The British, like Montgomery, want a concentrated blow in one place. George Patton, like other Americans, prefers a giant envelopment. The original plan for Operation Husky has a U.S. assault in the west, a British assault in the southeast, crushing the enemy in a pincer. The British prevail. Both forces will hit the southeast corner. To Alexander, envelopment means weakness in the middle. Montgomery wants to smash one big gap. One of his commanders, General Oliver Leese.
But General Montgomery was very nervous, rather naturally at that moment, of mines. We were frightened of being shot up, clearing up the mines by machine guns in front of barbed wire on the beaches. We'd had an absolute plethora, an absolute kind of bellyful of mines, the whole way up, really, from Alamein, really, beyond Tripoli, up to Tunisia, really. So we pressed very, very hard that we should land in two places. Ourselves on the right, the Americans on the left, and very, very close together.
July 8th, D-2. A fair day, and 3,000 ships bearing 7 divisions are at sea. They converge from Algeria, Tunisia, the Middle East. One division comes direct from the United States, another from England. The navies are in perfect harmony with the soldiers. The American admirals even agree to carry the Army's Arab donkeys on their ships. The next day, high winds spring up. The force is now in danger of being scattered. General Lucien Truscott.
I command a 3rd Infantry Division, reinforced, totaling some 50,000 with the administrative troops. Were loaded completely in shore-to-shore craft. These flat-bottom craft are very comfortable when the water is very smooth, but unfortunately we ran into a storm at sea. It was extremely rough, and the men on board these landing craft suffered seasickness very, very seriously. And believe me, when they saw a beach, they were very happy to land on it, even against opposition.
From Africa, Malta, the Middle East, our air power isolates the battlefield. The airmen also drop airborne infantry. General, then Colonel James Gavin.
Well, the 82nd Airborne Division was given the mission of sending a reinforced regimental combat team in on the night before D-Day. Now, this was quite without precedent in our history. We'd never done anything near the size of this. I should add that just before I took off, a man came up to tell me that there was a 35-mile wind from west to east. Well, now, normally our training practice had been not to jump in more than a 15-mile wind, because jumping is hazardous enough alone without a 35-mile additional increment of velocity to your speed. But there was nothing to do about it. Here we were going in, couldn't turn back then. Besides, we had made it a policy that every man would jump. Even if the plane was lost and didn't know where it was, nobody would come back to Africa. Everybody went in, and they would do the best they could if they were alone. So we had to go, and we did.
Each hour approaches. Only the plan, etched on the minds of thousands of frightened men, can tell the tale. Paratroopers are dropping behind the beaches. Omar Bradley's dime and cent forces land around 3:30 a.m. The 1st Division at Gela. The untried 45th at Scoliti. Joss, under Truscott, hits Licata. At dawn, the plan is in control. Somehow thousands of small, confused events and individual acts have shaped themselves to the inexorable plan.
Force hours was jumped about 30 miles to the east of Gela. And the troopers really scattered then all the way from the British sector away up beyond Gela, and they were in front of the 1st Division, the U.S. 45th Division, and the British forces down below. It turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because the Germans and the Italians were thoroughly confused. They thought there were about 3 to 4 times as many paratroopers as they were, and the paratroopers just had been trained to fight the best they could on their own. Wherever they encountered a pillbox, they attacked. Wherever they encountered any forces, they attacked them. They ambushed vehicles on roads, cut communication lines, and so on. In daylight, I had gotten together I had 25 people during the night. And the confusion of the fighting was such that daylight I only had about 8.
D-Day, July 10th, 1943. Dime, cent, and Joss pour ashore. Operation Husky is the largest single beach assault in history. By smashing enemy aircraft on the ground, forcing his airfields back, the air forces have spared the Allies the major enemy air offensive they fear the most. But enemy dive bombers still can stab at ships loaded with precious tanks and guns. This assault sees landing ship tanks, LSTs, for the first time. New pontoon causeways are used to cross hidden sandbars. The plan does not depend upon seizing a major port. The invasion is to be supplied over the 100 miles of open beaches. Our lack of interest in a port and the landings despite bad weather surprised the enemy. By noon of D-Day, Joff's force has Licata, and Truscott's troops plunge inland. Meanwhile, during the night, the British have landed on the right. The wind-scattered airborne, the Canadians and Highlanders on Paquino Peninsula. 2 more divisions, 2 brigades, further right toward Syracuse. The Sicilians do not know or care that Mussolini has bellowed that the Allies will be defeated at the water's edge. The British 8th Army pushes out, looking for the 75,000 Germans on the island.
My job was to go straight on. We captured quite a few Italians. We were getting in like it, and we came up against no German resistance at all. Didn't really mind how many Italians there were in the place at all. They didn't really come into the issue, but the point was really what the German resistance was going to be.
The Germans first appear in front of the Americans. On July 11th, Hermann Goering panzers pour onto the plain behind Gela. Enemy air attacks the night before have burned an LST with needed tanks and guns. A morning mist at Pantelleria keeps air support on the ground. The riflemen fight the wave of steel with infantry weapons. They overrun, and the panzers get within 1,000 yards of the beaches. Now fire control parties, combined Army and Navy, coordinate fire from the wall of ships offshore. It is the first time the Army has fully trusted Navy guns to support troops on shore. Radar, heroic spotting plane pilots, shore parties create a new invasion weapon. The riflemen clean up amid the smashed German armor. The 82nd Airborne, still behind enemy lines, plays a vital part.
We lost a lot of people, buried about 50 on the battlefield right where we fought them, but we handled them well. Knocked out, took 3 of their tanks, 12 big mortars, lots of trucks, and drove them out. I later found out after the war that, as a matter of fact, that the Hermann Goering Division commander was relieved of command as a result of that fight and his lack of aggression. Well, I don't know. That's the way it goes.
Coincidence and tragedy, so common to combat, had their moments in this Sicilian campaign, too. On July 11th, the U.S. Air Force gave short notice of a night drop of 2,000 paratroopers to reinforce Patton's army. By chance, the Germans also mounted an air attack that night. When the Allied troop-carrying planes arrived immediately after the German raid, Allied ground troops, along with Navy gunners, mistaking the Allied planes for Germans, shot down our own aircraft and machine gun paratroopers hanging in their harnesses. 23 planes were lost. More than 20% of the paratroopers were casualties.
That same day, the British take Syracuse. They also meet German tanks in front of Augusta. They enter the city, but are forced out by the crack Italian Napoli division. Augusta falls on July 14th. The perennially hungry Sicilians, the last to embrace fascism, are the first to see it go. In Rome, Il Duce is beating his breast and shouting, "The occupation, it must not come." But in East Prussia, even Hitler sees that it has come and accepts Field Marshal Kesselring's plan for a delayed withdrawal from Sicily. Meanwhile, the Sicilians, invaded by ancient Greek, Roman, Carthaginian, Vandal, Norman, and Arab, settle down to enjoy the new invasion. A local fascist enacts the pitiful little pantomime which will be played again and again from Syracuse to Berlin in the next 2 years. July 17th, the invasion is 8 days old. The Germans now have their own plan. Withdraw from the west, fighting rear guard actions on the few roads, the many mountains. Concentrate at Catania and stop the British drive to Messina. Behind shortened lines, escape. Thus, General Patton is under orders to go slowly north, and the enemy is already slipping east. Patton impatiently orders an armored sweep to Palermo, the infantry clearing mountains on his right. Prescott's 3rd Division, superbly trained in forced marching, fights the 100 miles from Agrigento to Palermo in just 4 days. Foot patrols beat the tanks into the city on July 22nd. It is the major port, the largest city on Sicily. Palermo holds few Germans, but offers Italian prisoners in burdensome numbers. The blazing sun has been merciless, Prescott writes. Every plodding footstep brought thirst for which there was all too little water. In the east, on the Catania plain, a major battle is developing. Montgomery needs a bridge across the Sameto River, and a British paratroop drop brings another weird coincidence. The Germans also drop paratroops at the same place, at the same time, to hold the same bridge. The 200 British paratroopers fight all day, but are outnumbered. The ground forces rescue them and take the bridge. The British can now see Catania 5 miles away, but the delay has permitted Hermann Göring Panzers, the Napoli Division, and other enemy units to deploy as an aggressively defensive army. Montgomery calls on his reserves and attacks. By July 16th, the frontal attack for the narrow coastal shelf between Mount Etna and the sea proves too costly. Montgomery rests the 8th Army in defensive positions while 7th Army is turned eastward to link with his units in the north. Then Montgomery will swing a left hook around Mount Etna. On August 1st, Montgomery leaves the Catania plain, goes to the hills north and west.
The days when we were fighting away on the west side of Etna were the most frustrating days that I ever had during the war. We were fighting for the first time in this very difficult country, you see. The 8th Army, which fought primarily up through the desert. Well, it was a beastly area. It was very hot. We were a long way from the sea. You couldn't get the children to bathe. We were fighting this everlasting lava dust. And it was a very, very hard, wearisome, dull fighting there. And very difficult to make very much progress up against stiff resistance in difficult country.
In its eastward thrust, the 1st Division fights for Troina. It is a heavily defended town on top of a hill, like most in Sicily. In the fight, the enemy launches 24 separate counterattacks. The battle goes through August 3rd, August 4th, August 5th. Ernie Pyle writes, "Great clouds of dust and black smoke rose in the sky until the whole horizon was leaded and fogged. Our biggest bombs exploded, and our artillery in a great semicircle crashed and roared like some gigantic inhuman beast that had broken loose and was out to destroy the world." Troina falls only on August 6th, the day after Catania. It is in this charged atmosphere that George Patton slaps a battle-fatigued soldier, tells him to rejoin his unit, make a man of himself. At Eisenhower's command, Patton makes a public apology, but the episode almost costs his indignant country a bold and tested commander it will need. Even before Troina and Catania fall, the enemy is leaving Sicily. Along the north coast, the 3rd Division fights die-hard rear guards with tanks on the road, mules in the mountains, and landing craft on the shore. When Patton insists on an immediate landing at Brolo over the protest of Omar Bradley, his corps commander, it is touch and go for Truscott's troops.
This second landing, we hadn't gotten quite into position where we could support the battalion, in my opinion, and I wanted to postpone the operation for a day. General Patton objected very strenuously and ordered me to go on to the operation, which I did. And just a little while afterwards, he came storming into my command post and giving everybody in sight, sound, and hearing hell as a typical Patton way, and came up to where I was at my little trailer with General Keyes and several other members of my staff. And he says, "Damn it, Lucian, what's the matter with you? You afraid to fight?" And I whistled right back at him and said, "Why, General Patton, you know that isn't true. Of course I'm not afraid to fight. If you think you can find someone to command this division and do a better job than I can, find him." And General Patton said, "Oh, damn it, Lucian." Threw his arm around my neck, say, "Come on in, let's have a drink of your liquor." So we did. The landing operation went on, and we almost lost the battalion, but we did gain some time.
It will take another 6 days of wounds and death to reach Messina. The feats of the engineers become a legend.
The Germans had really pulled off one major demolition. They had blown off the whole face of the cliff. 150 feet of road just dropped into the sea. Well, it was quite an engineering feat. And the engineers said, "Oh, it'll take 3 days to repair this." I gave them until noon the next day. I already had a regiment crossing over the mountain farther up and heading on toward Messina. Well, they worked all night long on this thing. By noon the next day, they had a bridge.
The battle now is all but done. After Rome is bombed on July 19th, Del Duce, the ex-socialist who made the trains run on time, who made the Italians dream for 21 years, who stabbed his neighbor France in the back, is deposed on July 25th. Italy will soon surrender. We have inflicted 32,000 casualties on the Germans. The 38-day campaign cost the Allies 5,000 dead, 14,000 wounded. But men have been found and great divisions tested. The Germans are in retreat. Soon, Omar Bradley will be chosen to lead Americans across the English Channel. Patton, talented but temporarily disgraced, will later become great as Bradley's subordinate. The Mediterranean is safe. Italy is knocked from the war. The Allied plan has worked, but, ironically, so has the German plan. The Straits of Messina are never closed. The enemy drains his power from the broken flask of Sicily. The time he wins builds a series of defenses across the Italian mainland. The Allies dominate the sea and air, but torpedo boats, coastal guns, and one of the most dense concentrations of flak of the war hold our ships and planes at bay. The Lehrgang, the withdrawal of what Hitler calls his vital human material, goes on day and night. 40,000 Germans, 62,000 Italians escape. When Patton's patrols arrive on August 17th, Messina is being shelled from across the straits. The British arrive soon after. Although both allies agreed to the strategy of the campaign, that empty harbor and the great escape cloud the bright memory of victory.
I doubt that their escape could have been prevented under the plan of operations in which we invaded Sicily. I think it's very probable had the original landing plan, which contemplated the Americans landing in the western tip for the capture of Palermo and the British landing farther up the southeastern coast, I think perhaps not so many would have escaped.
We were deeply disappointed in their success in getting across Messina. We thought when we got the island, we'd get all of them. but they withdrew mostly at night with pretty good ack-ack, and thus we were unable to intercept them. It was a disappointment to a lot of us who thought we'd get them and finish them there, but we had to fight them another day later.
Ahead lies Italy. Already Mark Clark's Fifth Army loads in Africa and Sicily for the Holocaust of Salerno. Soon Eisenhower and Alexander will send Montgomery up the Italian toe. Ahead is Cassino in its mountains, Anzio in its mud. Now Truscott's guns prepare the first artillery shells to land on the mainland. After 1 year and 9 months more, Truscott and Leese will lead the 5th and 8th Armies to final victory.
Following the campaign on Sicily, mountains, mud, and misery awaited the Allied forces on the Italian mainland itself. They found all of these and more at a beachhead at Anzio. Coaxed by Winston Churchill, hungry for Rome, the Allies attempted an amphibious slash at the shin of Italy. Operation Shingle proved another desperate adventure in the epic war against Hitler.
0150 hours, 22 January 1944. A rocket barrage lasting 10 minutes. British commandos, American Rangers assault at 2 a.m. By dawn, the main forces of 6th Army Corps are streaming ashore. A rehearsal south of Naples the week before has been a near tragedy. Guns, men, vehicles swamped and lost. Now the real thing, and the landing is almost perfect. The initial force consists of 1 British, 1 American division, reinforced. The landing is a complete surprise to the enemy, is all but unopposed. The Anzio port is only slightly damaged, and troops and weapons use it, pass through the seaside town where ancient Romans used to suntan and feast. The British go to the left to the Anzio-Albano Road toward Highway 7, a main road to Rome. On the right, the American 3rd Division finds a few Germans resting from the Battle of Cassino. Still expecting an enemy counterattack at any moment, assault forces race 2 miles down the coast to Nettuno, find the welcome so far still friendly. Now they turn inland into the Pontine marshes drained by Mussolini for resettlement. Meanwhile, the air forces carry out Operation Strangle in a 500-mile ring around the beaches. The first hitch develops. The British expect flat tank country, find instead woods and impassable gullies, which African veterans immediately call the wadis. They will have a fearful importance later on. The Americans find all is well. January 30th, 8 days after D-Day, the Allies move. That night, 760 U.S. Rangers creep toward Cisterna through muddy drainage ditches, and at dawn come up in the midst of an unreported Panzer force. They fight all day, This is the first of the many hells of Anzio. The 3rd Division attacks savagely, but gets within only a mile of the town. Only 6 Rangers escape. CBS News correspondent Stuart Novins was a 30-year-old infantry lieutenant at Anzio.
I suppose the essential fact about Anzio for the combat infantryman is that the whole war is compressed within 200 yards. When we got moving, it was a succession of 200-yard fronts. But within the 200 yards, a whole world was compressed. You learned a great deal. You learned that people are capable of infinitely more than they ever demand of themselves. They can be more hungry, more tired, more frustrated, more afraid. The Germans had used anti-aircraft guns, 88-millimeter guns, in the African campaign, and instead of pointing them up, they shot them flat. They became very highly mobile and very highly effective artillery pieces. It had a flat, sharp sound coming in, fast. Too fast for you to get out of the way, too fast to know where it was coming from or where it would hit. It was a terrible gun if you were on the wrong end of it. I suppose a good gun if you were behind the firing block. It took a long time to counter the German 88.
As the Cisterna attack fails, the 88s make the British on the left feel the deep drain of blood and manpower begun 4 years before in France, the Far East, Africa. The Tommies take Aprilia, a modernistic village they call the Factory, then attack toward Campiglione with part of the newly landed U.S. 1st Armored Division. Mud, narrow roads make it essentially an infantry action, house to house, hand to hand. Hitler has told his troops, win or die. They counterattack in small units from front, side, rear, night and day. Their strength grows as ours drains away. Thrown in higgledy-piggledy, as Kesselring says, they fight with terrible fury, find the wadis perfect avenues to infiltrate, set up wicked ambushes for Allied tanks. Nonetheless, on February 1st, 10 days after the landings, the British breach the main German line, but the Allies are exhausted. The advance to Campiglione is, in reality, a German victory. And the Germans are now ready to smash the British finger pointing at the Alban Hills and drive 6th Corps into the sea. The opposing forces are now equal, about 70,000 to 70,000, but the enemy is relatively fresh. The Germans strike white-hot hammer blows against the salient. The British feel the pain. Famous units, the Irish Guards, the Duke of Wellingtons, the King's Light Shropshires, the Foresters, the London Scots, are cut up, scattered, and isolated, reduced to handfuls of desperate men. Aprilia, the Factory, falls to the Germans on February 10th. 2 counterattacks by the understrength American 45th Division failed to regain it. Enemy tanks, self-propelled guns are now hidden there. In spite of heavy air support, we fall back. 3 miles in 5 bitter, bloody days, fighting in the wadis, cut off in the caves, dying in the ditches. The Anglo-Americans now fight for the life of the beachhead at the last defense line. There are no more reserves. Behind them is the water's edge. All around is death and annihilation.
The crisis came on February 18th and 19th. Guns, tanks, and flesh and blood met the Germans coming down the Albano Road, and brave men stopped them at places like the bowling alley, the Dead End Road, and an almost legendary overpass called the Flyover. Once again, the Germans won and won and won until they lost.
Storms hit shipping, add to supply problems. The Italian weather bogs down Anzio as it does Cassino, giving the enemy a generous gift of time. Anzio is a mud hole. One nurse recalls dropping her wristwatch in her tent beside her cot. The watch sank. She never saw it again. The mud is impartial. The Germans have their share of it, too. There is a young cartoonist at Anzio with a special Fifth Army tragicomic flair. He remembers gratefully that, unlike the trapped and miserable men he pictured in the Army newspaper Stars and Stripes, he could leave the beachhead whenever he was ready. The creator of the now immortal Willie and Joe, Bill Malden.
I might say there was an awful lot of cartoon material at Anzio. It lent itself to that sort of thing. One thing that you might say, I suppose, made the Anzio situation different from many other situations in the war was the fact that these fellows were sort of trapped in two dimensions. They not only couldn't go forward because of the mountains or backward because of the sea, but also they were trapped in a vertical sense, too. It's if they stood up, they got shot, and if they sat down, they were in the mud. I suppose you could best describe it as being the existence of a rabbit and coyote territory. Your entire life was pretty much underground, and you spent as little time as possible bouncing around on top. One way you could tell who had been at Anzio recently was that you'd make any kind of a sudden zipping or swishing or whooshing noise at him, and he'd be liable to go on his face in the dirt. There was a controversy about whether medics should get combat pay or not. I believe Ernie Pyle deserves the credit for having gotten that through. Medics finally did start collecting combat pay, as they should have been all along. In the early stages of the beachhead, until they ran out of livestock, there was quite a lot of livestock killing being done accidentally on purpose. I don't know if any livestock actually survived that beachhead or not. I doubt it very much did. The beachhead certainly proved that the human is a pretty adaptable creature, because I can't imagine a more miserable circumstance to live under, and yet these fellows managed to make it livable for themselves. There were thousands of barrels of wine in various states of decay buried around the beachhead area, and there's quite a bit of metal in the hoops around a cask. And mine detectors can't tell the difference between metal hoops and mines, so occasionally mine detectors would be put to the job of turning up these barrels of buried booze. It tasted best distilled. There were all sorts of little establishments operating all over the beachhead, and sometimes they operated on a temporary basis if they had intolerant officers in command. Sometimes they operated full scale. all the time, wide open.
By spring, the British are again sounding the old shrill Celtic challenge of the pipes. The Americans make transatlantic noises with bat and ball, and the voice of the faraway cowboy is heard on the beachhead. It matters some, but not enough, that shells are falling a few hundred yards away as the English trot out their stable of thoroughbreds and bookies. Since the first days of the beachhead, Anzio has been under heavy attack by the German Air Force, appearing in its greatest strength since the Battle of Sicily. Any toll of shipping in Italy is serious, since most landing craft are now in England awaiting D-Day. This will contribute to an ammunition shortage on the beachhead later on. The Germans fly 2,500 sorties in all, lose more than 200 planes. Eventually, they will give up daylight raids, but maintain a deadly night harassment of the beachhead. After such a raid, Ernie Pyle, beloved chronicler of the GI, is still alive in his apartment. In spite of the air attacks, Anzio is now essentially a great artillery battle. The Allies have more guns, but the Germans have the smaller, more concentrated target. From their perch in the Alban Hills and with aerial observation, they have everything on the beachhead zeroed in. The Germans also have a star performer, Anzio Annie, alias the Anzio Express, to those who cannot believe a 65-foot gun shooting a 700-pound high explosive projectile can be a female. Stuart Noven says it sounded like a boxcar coming in sideways. This is a part of the daily inferno of Anzio in the springtime. The 280-millimeter gun bursts are what one simply gets used to, if you are lucky. The hospitals are known as Hell's Half-Acre. They are in enemy range and they are hit. Patients, doctors, medics, and nurses die together. Army nurse Ramona Gilligan was there.
In my particular ward, I had head and spine, and a lot of them, of course, were confused and didn't know where they were. And they'd hear a woman's voice, and they would imagine it was their mother or their sister or their sweetheart. And whatever name they mentioned, you were it. And you said, yes, I'm here, and held onto their hand or something to reassure them. And another way that we tried to help them was, no matter what state they were from, we were from that state, too. Even though they said, well, you don't sound like from that state, and we say, well, this is what the Army has done to my accent. And especially when you see these young boys, these 18, 19-year-old boys that sort of hit home. And, you know, we all had our little good cries at night, you know, but never before the patients. We tried to keep up while we were on the ward. But that's the way we could, I think, let off steam, was to cry it out a little bit when we got home, got back to our tents.
The 23rd of May, 1944. Casino has fallen. The Anzio breakout begins just 4 months, 1 day, and 3 3/4 hours after the first 2 divisions landed. We now have 7 divisions, 90,000 combat troops to the enemy's 55,000. Never before this, says General Truscott, was there a real chance, even at some fleeting moment, for a breakout. The British anchor the left, the Americans will take Cisterna, sweep left to the Alban Hills. Cisterna is not easy. It is the last of Anzio's many hells. Only an unknown angel still stands in the fountain in the square when Cisterna falls on May 25th. The Germans are in general retreat from Cassino, the Gustav Line from Anzio. On that same day, 5th Army coming up the coast links up with 6th Corps. The beachhead is absorbed.
Fighting their way up the Italian peninsula, the Allied forces faced one of the most impregnable natural defense positions in Europe, Monte Cassino. The town and the mountain were the keystone of the Gustav Line, the German defense fortifications spanning Italy. The two commanders who faced each other at Cassino were German General Friedland von Senger and American General Mark Clark.
The monastery of Monte Cassino today, founded in 529 by Saint Benedict, still enduring. A bridge of culture from the old world to the new. The historic observation post on the road to Rome. The monastery in the autumn of 1943, destroyed twice in past centuries because of its strategic value, once more this peaceful sanctuary for prayer and scholarship lies in the path of an army driving toward Rome, the American 5th Army of Mark Clark. The monastery's ancient treasures are brought by German trucks to Rome. The monks protest to Nazi officers in vain. They too must leave. Only the aged abbot and a small caretaking party are allowed to stay in the monastery. Trucks bring the priceless heritage of the past to safety, except for several crates which will wind up in Germany. But for the handwritten copies shipped to Rome, most of the original works of Cicero, Horace, Ovid, Virgil, and Seneca would be lost to the world. As Clark advances, the mountain is heavily fortified. Hitler orders Monte Cassino, the road blocked to Rome, defended to the death. If it falls, von Senger knows the entire Gustav Line will crumble.
In order to be able to build the main line as a defensive one, you have to defend yourself with less numerous troops further south. So this led to the establishment of what we call the Bernard Line and you the Winter Line, which is some 10 to 15 miles further south, and tried to defend it as if it were the main line. And in fact, we kept up quite a long resistance there, which made it possible to put more forces into the Gustav Line, who were not bothered by any fighting, but just by building the line and making it a fortress.
Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, Supreme Commander in Italy, is confident the well-fortified Gustav Line can be held indefinitely against frontal attack.
You'll recall we landed down in North Africa. Troops finally went into Sicily, they crossed into Italy, and we fought our way all the way up to the Gustav Line. And that's where we find ourselves with the Abbey of Monte Cassino staring us in the face on commanding ground, we then decided to outflank some of this difficult resistance area by an amphibious landing that would go up to Anzio, and from there we would push on to Rome, the Eternal City.
The American High Command is unenthusiastic about the Italian campaign. Heavy losses here could weaken the main invasion across the Channel. But British General Sir Harold Alexander, the Allied commander-in-chief in Italy, disagrees. Like Churchill, he believes this is the soft underbelly of the Axis. The monastery hypnotizes and terrifies those who must attack. Are Germans hiding up there? Alexander orders a three-pronged attack on the Cassino area. The Free French Expeditionary Corps, the American 34th Division, and the 36th Division from Texas across the icy Rapido River, 9 feet deep, 60 feet wide. The Germans see suspicious preparations down below and guess Monte Cassino will soon be assaulted. They move into cleverly camouflaged forward positions and prepare for attack. It is now January 20th, 1944. Texans, hastily prepared, must carry their boats 2 miles to the river. The slaughter is appalling. In 2 days, the Texans lose 1,681 men. Texas will never forget the Rapido. At war's end, members of the division will demand a congressional investigation of the action, severely criticizing the assumption that Mark Clark used sound judgment in ordering the attack. The Secretary of War will reply that the attack was a necessary one and state in his words, General Clark exercised sound judgment in planning it and ordering it, driving the Germans away from our landings at Anzio during the critical hours of the first foothold. On January 24th, Americans of the 34th Division strike for Snake's Head Ridge and the Abbey. The Germans have flooded the valley below the ridge. The Italian winter does the rest. Tanks and supplies cannot get through. The advance slows down. The men must proceed alone through fields of mine-laden mud. Front-line troops slowly push toward Monte Cassino. Finally, they reach barren Snake's Head Ridge. They're only 1,000 yards from the monastery. The Germans can see every move the Americans make on Snake's Head Ridge and fire at everything they see. They have the 34th Division completely pinned down. The Americans must carry all their supplies 7 long, dangerous miles under German observation. The stubborn attempt to storm Monte Cassino has failed. The deadly struggle to take the mountain fortress has just begun.
In February 1944, the Allies prepared a second attack on Monte Cassino.
New Zealanders will now move into the battle. These tough Boer soldiers, battle-tested in Africa, are ordered to seize the railway station just south of the town. Indians, also veterans of Africa, relieve the American 34th Division on Snake's Head Ridge. They are to take the monastery and sweep over the hill to the road to Rome. The Indians will soon find that Snake's Head Ridge is a shooting gallery, and they are the clay pigeons, as were the Americans before them. The Indians grimly assault Monte Cassino across the barren ridge. A few yards are gained, then they too are pinned down. And the cost of those few yards is very high. The monastery seems to have eyes. Enemy observers must be hiding inside. An Allied pilot is sure he sees Germans. This is reported to the commander of the two attacking divisions, Lieutenant General Sir Bernard Freyberg of New Zealand.
I met with Freyberg almost daily in working out his plans for the attack of Cassino and the monastery. And the longer he looked at it and his troops looked at it, it became more of a formidable obstacle, and certainly it was that. And finally, General Freyberg came to me and said, I've changed the plans for my attack, and I intend to request that the monastery itself be bombed. And I don't blame him for requesting all the assistance he could get. I objected to the bombing of the monastery because we'd had considerable experience in Italy in the decision whether we should destroy works of art and whether we should destroy buildings that had great history attached to them. And we found that in the case of the monastery, where it was not used by the Germans, our intelligence indicated, and all my commanders that had been fighting around it for so long said they had never had any indication that the Germans were using it as a military defensive position.
But Clark, under pressure from Freyberg, Alexander, and Indian Commander Tucker, finally authorizes the bombing. Leaflets are prepared warning those in the monastery, the abbot, and almost 200 civilian refugees. The leaflets, stuffed in shells, are fired into the monastery. Inside the ruins are the abbot and the surviving civilians, but not a single German. Were there ever any inside the abbey? CBS News correspondent Daniel Shore questions General von Sanger.
The abbey was meant not to be fortified, at least not the abbey as a building.
Was it?
Not fortified, no.
It was meant not to be, but...
Meant not to be fortified.
But did you ever fortify it?
Well, we fortified it after the 17th of February, after it had been bombed, when it was no longer an abbey, but just a rubble of stones.
Now the Germans eagerly occupy the abbey. Its rubble makes a perfect fortress. Soon they are ready for the Allied ground attack. The Abbot Diamari and about 60 others survive the bombing of the monastery. More than 100 have been killed. The abbot agrees to sign a statement that not a single German was in the monastery and flees to Rome. Hitler fully exploits this as a propaganda victory. Completely bogged down, Freyberg prepares the third battle. This time, a simultaneous attack on Monte Cassino and the town itself. But suddenly the rains come. The attack must be postponed. The Germans use the next 3 weeks to fortify the town of Cassino. At last, the rains stop. The Indians are ordered to capture the monastery. The New Zealanders will take the town. But first, it will be blasted to oblivion by 500 bombers. American Generals Norstadt, Cannon, and Lemnitzer are briefed.
Gentlemen, we all know the purpose of this operation against Cassino.
Yes, we have been held up there for some time. There's just one point I want to make absolutely certain, sir, and that is, are the Army quite clear how far they've got to withdraw from Cassino before we attack it? Yes, we plan to withdraw from the fringe of the town tonight.
bomb line will be about there. We will be well behind it by dawn.
The timing works like this, sir. The attack will be opened by medium bombers, beginning with the B-25s of Tactical Air Force. Then come the heavies in waves of 15-minute intervals. Following the heavies, the B-26s will complete the attack.
New Zealand tanks lead infantry in an attack on the town. But the tanks are soon blocked by giant bomb craters. The 500 bombers have completely devastated Casino. The town, now only a pile of wreckage, is dead. But Germans are alive and secretly awaiting the New Zealand infantrymen. The New Zealand infantrymen don't wait for their block tanks. They advance confidently into the silent town. Who could possibly be alive in this rubble? The Germans wait. It will be a deadly ambush. Their tanks. Now, from bomb-proof basements, they bring them into action against foot soldiers. Hiatus in the fierce struggle. Allied aid men wave the Red Cross flag. They're allowed to enter the battlefield and evacuate their wounded. Now German aid men come out and are allowed to give first aid to their comrades. Once more, von Senger has stopped the Allies. battle is over. The mountain and half the town are still German. Alexander now realizes Cassino will never be taken by a few divisions. He decides to launch a tremendous attack against the entire left flank of the Gustav Line. He moves the American Fifth Army to the coast and brings in the British Eighth Army. To succeed, the attack must be mounted in complete secrecy. Cautiously, combat troops are brought into position. Men of many nations, Canadian, American, British, French, Algerians, Moroccans, Poles, New Zealanders, Indians. These are the fierce Moroccan Goumiers, specialists in mountain fighting and trained to kill silently. 12,000 will soon be loosed on Von Sanger. They carry rifles but prefer knives. Men, tanks, and trucks secretly approach the front. Von Sanger is so completely deceived, he goes to Germany to get a decoration from Hitler. Clark tells General de Gaulle how he will use the unorthodox Goumier. Then he and General Anders, the Polish Corps commander, discuss the main attack on Monte Cassino. The Poles of the British Eighth Army will try to do what the Americans and Indians failed to do: take the monastery. Under radio silence, they will be brought into position at night behind an elaborate camouflage screen. General Alexander is finally ready. These are his orders: the French to cut through the Orunchi Mountains, the British, Indians, and Canadians to cross the Rapido and secure Highway 6, the main road to Rome, the Poles to seize Monte Cassino, again the key to victory. 11 p.m., May 11th, 1944. Follow infantrymen across the Rapido and secure a bridgehead only 2 miles from Highway 6, the road to Rome. German artillery tries to wipe them out. For 3 days, the Canadians and British hammer yard by yard toward Highway 6 in spite of heavy German fire. Last on May 16th, the famous British Battle Axe Division breaks through. They approach Highway 6. The Germans fall back toward Rome. The pincers are closing. The Poles approach the top of Monte Cassino. At 10:30 on the morning of May 18th, the gallant Poles seize the monastery. But it is a triumph of many nations. The fall of Cassino is the fall of the Gustav Line. On the coast, the Americans already have broken through and are striking for Rome along the Appian Way. This coastal road to Rome is wide open. On Sunday morning, June 4th, American tanks of Clark's Fifth Army enter Rome.
Let's go back now, almost a year, and pick up our portrait of Benito Mussolini. The end of his story ends our story on the battleground that was Italy.
July 24th, 1943. The Grand Council of Fascism meets. The king is determined to overthrow Mussolini. By 19-6, the council supports Victor Emmanuel. The Duce is stripped of his power, then arrested. 6,000 feet up Gran Sasso, the broken gargoyle of Rome goes into exile. A new government proclaims armistice with the Allies. Then Hitler compounds Italy's tragedy. On September 12, 1943, German parachutists rescue Mussolini. They find a docile, mechanically smiling Duce, aging, sick, and eager to do the Germans' bidding. They fly him to his master. Publicly, Hitler welcomes Mussolini. Privately, the Fuhrer is bitter, disillusioned by Italy's proving more Italian than fascist, contemptuous of Mussolini's personal surrender. The Duce is dutifully bussed by Otto Skorzeny, his rescuer's commander. Then, pathetic and afraid, he pleads for return to his native Romagna and obscurity. Hitler will have none of it. He needs a symbol and sends Mussolini south to play the puppet. Far from the front, the tired actor forms a fascist republic on German cue and goes through the old postures. Only Nazi power preserves the squalid fiction. His followers are the scum of fascism. Hitler and Mussolini last meet July 20th, 1944. Scant hours after an anti-Nazi bomb wounds Hitler's right arm, which he holds stiffly to his side. In private meetings, Mussolini listens as the Nazi leaders quarrel, and Hitler screams accusations. Now, too late, the Italian realizes his German idol is irrational and doomed. Finally, Allied armies drive beyond the Po. Partisans swarm from hiding. Mussolini's fascist republic collapses. He flees northward and is captured. April 28, 1945, communist partisans shoot Mussolini against a garden wall. Petacci chooses to die beside him. In 1957, Italy exhumes Mussolini's hidden body. His widow and neo-fascist mourners bury him in his native village, Predappio. In the Duce's heyday, his countrymen forgave his faults and cheered him as their champion. His own profound shortcomings, along with Hitler's evil magnetism, left the Italian people a legacy of suffering, and Mussolini a blood-stained puppet's place in history.
Our four stories dealing with Benito Mussolini and the military fighting at Sicily, Anzio, and Cassino are just part of the total Italian campaign of World War II. Just as the war in Italy was but a part of the panorama of war that engulfed the entire globe, we will report on other campaigns in this continuing series, the CBS Video Library of World War II.